When we think of remakes, we think of this, or this, or this. But why? Why do some of these exist? You could throw your money into a volcano with those talking plastic pieces that pretend they're human on the view, and you'd still get more for your money's worth than some of these remakes. Remakes, or remasters, or reimaginings, whatever they call them, don't always get the best ratings as an average, and for very good reason. But we do get the occasional good ones. So when Resident Evil 2 Remake came around and knocked it out of the park, luck was with us. We got the antivirus to shit remakes in the form of an amazing title. And then here comes along Resident Evil 3 Remake as a follow-up. But how did it do? Let's find out. Resident Evil 3 Remake comes out April 3rd for $59.99 for Xbox, PC, and PS4. This is Karak, and as always, it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Resident Evil 3 Remake. Also, there were like 40 points to this embargo, what can and can't be seen, so I apologize if the footage is a bit scattered. Graphics are up first. Like Resident Evil 2 before it, where Resident Evil 3 Remake does such a great job as moving the memories of our past and a game that looked nowhere near as good as our memories and what we remember, and shuffling the undead remake style into our present, with excellent facial texture work, designs, and construction elements. That continued change to the better camera and movement helped Resident Evil 3 Remake feel a great deal more fluid and offers up some choice corrections to the gameplay itself that the prior title's tanky controls never really offered. And that makes climbing to the top of buildings being burned down from the inside by maniac DNA malformed giants who somehow lost the ability to climb ladders but can also now use complex firearms feel much better than they would originally. I love the menace of an enemy like that as well, just standing in the middle of the chaos they created with no worry about the repercussions. Light and shadow are also done spectacularly well, and in the case of some foreshadowing even, like when you creep around the edge of a back alley and you can see the shadow of a zombie munching down on a fresh dead manwich. And Resident Evil 3 continues in Resident Evil 2's footsteps when it comes to animation and facial work. When some dude's sitting on a train holding his insides in with one hand and talking down to you like you're a 3-year-old, it's hard not to think, this dude is an asshole, but man, that looks like it hurts at the same time. That ability to impart emotion with excellent animation isn't always the easiest element to capture. Capcom continues to nail it with these remakes. However, Resident Evil 3 Remake does have some issues. First, the lip syncing feels off in some points and in some cutscenes, in particular, especially with Jill and some of the other fighters on her team. Also, and this occurred in Resident Evil 2's remake to an extent, there are times when you think you might be able to go somewhere in the game, but it's just an invisible wall, resulting in you rubbing up against nothing as a zombie then bites your head off. Lastly, the reflections still look a little bit messy on the PC version. Noisy is a better word, and it crops up in particular places more than others. The game still looks amazing for the most part, don't get me wrong, it's just odd to have that kind of thing sticking around since it was in the original remake and was noticeable. I absolutely love the look of these games. However, they don't always perform the best. During the beta, some weird crap was happening. The normal consoles and the Pro actually performed pretty well, but the Xbox X in particular was rough with some huge FPS drops, and that's because it was trying to hit that 4K resolution at the same time. Now, I got to spend my time with the PC version, so you may want to hold off a bit in particular for more reports on if the consoles have been improved. And just like the other remake, we do have a game that runs very well, with a current i7 at 4.7 and a 2080 Ti 4K hovering a bit over 100 FPS was the norm. Now, it did have some drops to 60s and 70s in a couple key scenes with a ton of effects on screen, but that was actually very rare. While a 1080 can easily get between 1080p and 1440p respectively, with some settings to adjust, from some upscaling options, some mixes of anti-aliasing, and most of the special effects split out as well as an internal render scale. This allows for you to adjust what you need to hit the FPS you want. With testing, I did find out that most of the effects could be lowered to high or medium from ultra with almost no real change to the look of the game, in particular lighting and shadows, so check those first if you want to get some FPS back. Lastly, there's no ray tracing options in the PC build, and this was the retail that I was told about. Overall, like the prior title, Resident Evil Remake is excellent for the most part and offers a nice example of how to handle remakes, at least on the graphical front end. And it's always nice to see a game bring the memories of the past and make them experiences of the present. And that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. The game starts out with news scenes from across the city as the virus plagues across the locations and brings it all down into anarchy. And then you're suddenly in control of Jill Valentine, or Jill McClane, because basically she's John McClane's daughter from the Die Hard movies with the same attitude and love for killing people. And just when things start to go from bad to worse, you're saved by what looks like the scruffiest of the Jonas brothers and proceed to gnaw away at the meat of a story that has to do with genetic tampering, scientific experiments gone wrong, and future annihilation if Jill and, well, everyone else can't save anybody. The game is basically split over a series of hours, with each chapter starting out informing you what time of day it is as you progress towards the inevitable destruction of Raccoon City. Combat is handled basically the same, though one large change here in this game is that the knife no longer breaks in your inventory. Now you may think that's a get out of jail free card right there, especially in a Resident Evil game, but it really isn't, especially as this really barely does any damage at all. It's a unique choice for the game to have, and in the end didn't adjust my playstyle as much as I had originally thought when I heard about it. While diving and quick leaps out of the way are possible in Resident Evil 3's remake, depending on the difficulty, you can end up choosing spots and it can get very tight very quickly as enemies come out of corners and from hidden spots in some of the locations. Luckily, Jill can handle herself, like this amazing and safest way to escape a chokehold, which is to stab whatever's choking you with a giant Bowie knife the size of a boat oar. In fact, it's these moments that Resident Evil is at its best, the cheesy parts, the over-the-top action bits. Now, speaking of locations, since the story overlaps with Resident Evil 2 Remake, yes, you do visit a number of the same places throughout, in a different order and with different effects, items, and story bits. And that does mean that it can feel especially repetitive in the mid to late game locations. Enemies adjust as you step up the difficulty, with you able to choose 3 at the starting, and they leap faster and more often, as well as having more enemies depending on the difficulty you choose. Now, when you beat the game on any difficulty, a store opens up that has you buying items with points you've been awarded for challenges you've met in the game. Think of them like achievements. So not only are you getting achievements in the game, you're getting achievements in the game. They're called challenges. Each time you do this, you get points, and you can buy things like particular weapons, lockpicks, or items that'll be in your inventory right from the start. Items that maybe help you with defense or attack. If you're into that kind of thing, that can add replayability. But I say can because that is a big issue for me. That kind of stuff doesn't really do anything for me when it comes to replayability. And to be honest, there's really not that many things in the store that would have made me want to revisit the game anyway. As I said, it's more of an achievement in a game you've already got them. And I've never been into that kind of grind without new content or remastered content to explore, like we saw in Resident Evil 2 Remake, which we don't get here. When you beat the game on hard, you do unlock that nightmare difficulty, which adjusts those items. If you're playing this to play it once, I would suggest starting on the hardest difficulty and going from there. One thing to watch out for, if you die a couple times, the game will ask you if you want to set the difficulty lower. However, it does it in that death screen. If you are not looking, or if it's in a high stress situation, it is actually easy in the heat of the moment to accidentally do this. I should know, as in the last level, I ended up stepping down the difficulty and won the game, and then had to go back and reload an old save to beat it again on the normal difficulty. So watch very closely. If you die a couple times, you will see that pop up. When it comes to inventory and the way you go through the game, everything is pretty much the same, with you getting more inventory as you unlock more items, and you go throughout the various locations and fight the zombies and track down clues as to what's going on. I think for me, there are 2 big disappointments for Resident Evil 3 Remake that are pretty glaring. The first is its lack of length, even on harder difficulties. It is a very short game, 6 to 7 hours tops on the harder difficulty, and maybe a little bit more on the hardest, with maybe 5.5 on normal. Also, there are very few puzzles in the game, and that last thing is connected, and that means it feels a little bit threadbare. As a story and as a game, the lack of puzzles and the shorter time frame means even the cool stuff like the Nemesis doesn't feel as impactful as Resident Evil 2, because there isn't that tit for tat, that pause in action, that respite right after some kind of reckless moment. It really does sort of hurt it. That being said, you do have the Resident Evil 3 Resistance multiplayer that comes with the game, which I got some time with in the beta, a good deal of time. Sadly, it was broken during the review frame for this game, with basic tutorials and sections playable, but not online. It's a 4 versus 1 multiplayer game that I will say, while fun, it wasn't anything I could find myself playing for a long period of time. Fans of Dead by Daylight and those types of games may like it with you taking on the role of either the evil masterminds or the survivors. The masterminds trying to consistently stop the player from performing short objectives on the maps and holding them back from escaping. In a way, both sides sort of work against the clock, with survivors consistently grabbing money around the game world to buy items at base stations in the middle of combat, because as we all know, 3D printers just charge you right then and there. The beta was fun, but nothing in it suggests longevity nor any real changes between beta and final to hint at that would suddenly make me want to continue playing it. And while the survivors do get skills and upgrades as they go along, the maps themselves are a bit basic from what we've seen. But again, if something changes and that raises or lowers the score, I'll update it here. As a package, Resident Evil 3 Remake is not bad, but it's no great shakes, and it doesn't hold the line compared to the prior title when it comes to content. The lack of true depth here can be felt, and when it's combined with the relative dearth of any real investigation or puzzle moments, it just feels shallow as a follow-up, but also just by itself. If Resident Evil 2 was a feature-length movie, then Resident Evil 3 is a made-for-TV movie from a very famous IP, but no matter what, you can tell that slight difference. And that brings us to sound, music, and voice. And we're going to do sound first. So Resident Evil 2 Remake sounds excellent. It's got an assortment of weaponry at your disposal to destroy, dismember, disarm, and disintegrate the living, the dead, and the, well, just now dead. Special effects work really well to add a sense of environmental impact, like fruitlessly wandering around a secret lab, trying to find the secrets to what happened in the city, or trekking through the back alleys behind a toy store and hearing the stomping footsteps of Nemesis as he tracks you down. Those are great. One thing that is a bit confusing is that the game really has no stereo setting for the audio options, as TV, 5.1, and headphones. And while stereo is basically within the TV option, if you think about it, certainly not the headphones, as those are dramatically different, its range instantly then sets it to dynamic low, which seems odd. Luckily, you can just set it to TV and large or whatever else you want, but that seems to be a little bit missing and weird as an option not there. And that brings us to music. So I enjoy the Resident Evil music, and the remakes have really been no exception, but I found Resident Evil 3's music to be a bit lackluster compared to the prior titles, and just overall. It has the same tonal inflections and overall stylings that I expect, but it never really nailed home a scary moment like the music in Resident Evil 2 Remake, and that might also be because of the more action style that this game portrays. It's good, it's just not great, and wholly disturbing at times for sure, and it matches the melancholy story beats from time to time, but never really elevated anything. And that brings us to voice. One of the things to remember is that Resident Evil 3 is a more truncated game than Resident Evil 2, and the remakes follow the same patterns. And while there is a bit of discussion here and there, it's less overall voiced moments in Resident Evil 3 Remake than you may anticipate. There are some excellent characters regardless of that, including most of the side characters, which I liked. But even when the story is deep into its beats in the later section, it really actually feels a little bit subdued when it comes to larger speaking parts. What is here is good, however, though I do find the cheesy bits from the side characters more enjoyable than Jill herself, especially one of the main bad guys whose cupidity just knows no bounds and comes out with every single thing he says. I loved him. That's nothing against the voice work of the main protagonist either. That's just merely the writing. And all of that combined brings us to the fun factor. Resident Evil 3 Remake is enjoyable, don't get me wrong. It's always fun to visit these worlds, and while less puzzle heavy by a good amount than Resident Evil 2, and in fact less everything than Resident Evil 2, that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it. Exploring the locations, hearing more of the side story of Jill, and encountering the Nemesis made for a fun trek, but a severely short one. And there are parts of the game world later on that just aren't that well developed. All of that combined makes it feel a little less refined than Resident Evil 2 Remake, and I think it's an easy testament to its fun that I did want more of the game. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC. There is a delicate balance between quality and quantity. This isn't a fucking French restaurant. I've always been of the opinion during the game length discussions hinging on it that if it's an amazing game, it doesn't have to be 15 or 20 hours. We've seen that. But that's the issue here. Resident Evil 3 Remake isn't really an amazing game. It's a fun game and a good one, but one that ultimately does not equal the price point and doesn't really deliver the gameplay chops it should. So I would say this is definitely a wait. If the game's multiplayer shines to the point of raising the score, which I don't see how it would from what I experienced, or lowering the score, I will certainly update it. But I think this is a title that you really have to know what you're getting into, and that repetitiveness for the replayability, if that's fine for you and that's all you want, that's great. But if you want a new experience for your replayability, like the side stories that we saw in Resident Evil 2, that's not here, and I think that hurts it, and the multiplayer is not a good replacement for that. So like I said, this one's a wait for a sale. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Check out Reddit and Twitter and Facebook. You can always follow me there. And of course, you can become a patron. I buy a copy of every single game, even if the devs give me a code, and I give those away. If you get a chance, go ahead and comment in the comment section, and I'll enter you into the contest for that. And being a patron helps me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. I would love to see you there. It's an amazing group. And that's it for me. Stay tuned for some more videos this week. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.